The Greater Centerville Historians organized in the year 2000. The purpose of the organization is to preserve the history of the Township of Centerville, Cleveland and surrounding area. Gerald O'Neill, Charlie Bauer, Richard Wiegand, and myself, Kathleen Sixel, were the founding members. In 1831, the territory south of Green Bay was sold to the U.S. government by the Native Americans who had title to the land. The consideration was the promise of a reservation in another state. The Township of Centerville was established in 1850. The township had a village called Centerville. The reason for the hamlet's original name of Centerville was, in the days of the Indians, there was a trail along Lake Michigan between Manitowoc and Sheboygan. This heavenly spot was exactly at the halfway mark, so the early white man gave it the name Centerville. In 1849, the village of Centerville was surveyed and laid out in lots and blocks. The village of Centerville was renamed Hika when the Postmaster General informed the village leaders that another Centerville was located in the state. When it became time for Centerville to be renamed, a judge in Manitowoc by the name of Albert Schmidt would take kids hiking. The judge said, "You can't call a town hiking, so why not make it Hika?" Thus, the village of Centerville became Hika. In the early years, Centerville had the vision of becoming a lake port. To encourage ships to dock there, 2 piers were built into Lake Michigan. Many German immigrants arrived by schooners, and the village began to grow. The village had a brick factory, stores, schools, a Lutheran and a Catholic church, mill, saloons, blacksmith shop, and a fire department, and a brewery. When the brewery was built, the settlement began to flourish. But when fire destroyed the brewery, the largest industry, there was no longer a need for the harbor facilities. So ended this chapter of the development of Hika. 2 miles west of Hika, another settlement known as St. Wendel began to grow. It had a Catholic church, a general store with a connected dance hall, and a post office was also located in the complex, a funeral parlor, and at one time a motel. With the clearing of the forest, tilling of the land began. This prompted the exporting of lumber and grains. The farmers of Centerville looked forward to the building of a railway since they had a serious problem transporting their products. In 1873, the Milwaukee, Lakeshore, and Western Railroad was built between the settlements of Hika and St. Wendel and was named Centerville Station. In 1880, Centerville Station was renamed Cleveland after President Grover Cleveland. Cleveland, at that point in time, owes its growth to the fact that the Township of Centerville was a rich farming community, and farmers from miles around would bring products to be shipped by rail or ship. The village of Cleveland had several grocery stores, a furniture store, a funeral parlor, several saloons, Lutheran church, hardware stores, several gas stations, newspaper, photographer studio, several car dealerships, cheese factory, several feed mills, livestock yard, and lumber yards. The biggest business was the Cleveland Co-op, which offered many types of services. With the failing of grain crops, the farmers began dairy farming. With the abundance of milk, another industry began, cheese and butter making. Local cheese factories dotted the countryside. One-room schools were usually built near the cheese factories, so children would have a ride to school when farmers brought their milk. In 1958, Hika, St. Wendel, and Cleveland incorporated into the village of Cleveland. In 1968, the Cleveland Elementary School was built. The Township of Centerville has seen many farming changes, but dairy farming is still the primary vocation. Today, Cleveland is known as the seat of Lakeshore Technical College, which offers an educational alternative to 4-year colleges. An ancient proverb states, When an old person dies, a library burns to the ground. These words were the inspiration for organizing the Greater Centerville Historians. We hope to preserve as many memories as possible.
We have a young lady here who returned back from a beautiful trip, and she'd like to take over the duties that she's always handling for our group, and she can identify herself and the group also. Go right ahead, please.
My name is Kathy Sixel. It is May 8th, 2006, and it was about 60 degrees today, or perhaps a little warmer, and we are the Greater Centerville Historians, is that right?
That's too much trip, Kathy.
I know, right? And this evening we're going to have Chris Canal and Al Pape give us a presentation.
Okay.
And I want to welcome everybody, and I want to particularly welcome Al and Chris.
Very good. And as far as the presentations being given, we are going to do that in its entirety. And I believe Chris will be first, and Al will be second, but there's going to be an area in between where the people would like to ask questions. They may do so. Now, there's something you might want to direct them to do.
Perhaps if you have a question, jot it down as a little reminder for yourself after the presentation.
Okay.
And do you want the rules now?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Please raise your hand when you have information to add, and Mr. O'Neill will address you and move his camera so we do not miss any information you wish to share. Always state your full name. Try and use full names when referring to people, and don't use a nickname. And please don't visit when someone is speaking, because it'll pick up in the camera. And I also want to welcome Mr. Dersh. So nice of you to come, Ron.
Okay, and I guess tonight's question from the videographer is, when did you take your driver's test, and if you remember the vehicle you used, and who taught you how to drive?
Well, I lived on a farm, so you drove tractor.
Okay.
And my parents taught me how to drive, and it was a 39 Ford, a stick on the bottom.
Okay.
And we knew the cop had keel, so it wasn't too bad to take the test. I couldn't parable park, and he said it was all right.
Okay, very good.
License.
You slid through on that one.
I slid through, and I think the name of the cop was Pearl.
That's right. Very good. Thank you. And who do you have here, please?
Hi, I'm Alan Pape from Greenbush, Wisconsin, Sheboygan County.
Okay.
And as far as the learning to drive business, I learned on a 1955 Dodge.
Okay.
Two-door hardtop. My Uncle Joe taught me how to drive. And I flunked the first test in Milwaukee because he said turn at the left at the next opportunity, and I did turn at the next opportunity, and I went right into a one-way traffic coming my way. It was a trick question, and I'll never regret. I did pass the second time.
You passed the second.
Outside of having my teeth pulled, having a driver's test in Milwaukee was my second worst thing.
That has to be rough. It has to be.
Jerry, I have one more thing to
Why,
add.
sure.
And when I got my test, there weren't signal lights on the car yet. You still had to do it with your hand up and down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like
Okay.
that. I don't know how it just went anymore, but you had to do it out of the window with your hand.
Very good. Very good. Thank you. Okay, here we go. We have a new gentleman also, and we welcome him, and he'd like to introduce himself and provide some information. Go right ahead, please.
Yes, I'm Ronald E. Dersh, more commonly known as Ron.
Okay.
Originally from this area, born in this area in 1935. In the mid-50s, left for Madison
Okay.
and reside there yet today.
All right.
My father was the one who taught me how to drive.
Okay.
Obviously, driving the tractor first,
Yes.
which was a tremendous aid compared to those in town who didn't have that opportunity.
Correct.
We learned in a cow pasture.
Very good.
You couldn't hit too much out there without being in, if you did, you were in real serious trouble. Chevrolet pickup truck.
Okay,
Passed the driver's test in Manitowoc in the first shot, fortunately.
Good for you.
But I frankly don't remember the details of it, except that I did pass.
good enough. Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. And we have another gentleman here.
Hi, I am Fred Jacoby from Manitowoc, and I grew up in Cleveland, or just north of Cleveland on a farm. And I took my driver's test last days of March 1945. I was 14. If you were on a farm, you could get a driver's license when you were 14,
Mm-hmm.
which was supposed to limit you to daytime driving. Well, people didn't worry about those details that much,
Okay.
so we drove all the time. But I'd been driving car already for 4 years by that time.
Oh my gosh.
And I drove the car the first time when I was 9. From driving tractor, see,
Sure. Well, sure.
same thing.
That all helped.
1935 Ford.
Very good. Thank you very much. And who do you have here, please?
Melvin Yiddish, and I took my driver's test when I was 14 too, and I had the roughest patrol officer in the county at that time, Ludwig,
Ludwig. Oh boy.
and I took the test on a 34 Chevy pickup.
Was it a standard shift also?
Yes,
Okay.
there was no automatic at that time.
Okay. And did you pass your test, sir?
Yes,
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And who do you have here, please?
My name is Eugene Weiser, and I took my test in Plymouth, and because I was in Sheboygan County, and then we had a 39 Chevy with a shift on the steering column.
Okay. And who taught you how to drive?
My dad, and being on a farm, drove tractors, so
All right. That all helped again.
every bit helps.
Very good. Thank you very much. And who do you have here, please?
Willard Matthias. I started, I got my driver's license at the age of 14, and I drove a 38 Ford pickup.
Okay.
And I had Elmer Bergner giving me my test, and I went around the block, and he said, "That's good enough. You've been driving a long time already." So I passed.
You passed one block.
One block.
And no, did you mention who taught you how to drive?
My dad.
Your dad. Okay, very good. Thank you. And who do you have here, please?
I'm Alice Mathias from from Cleveland. I grew up in Manitowoc,
Okay.
and we never had my family never had a car, except my brother did get one, and that's the car I learned how to drive on. He taught me how, and it was an old big Packard, big four-door type thing.
Okay.
And I had a heck of a time learning how. I was very dumb at driving because I never experienced anything before that. And I took my test in Manitowoc, right by down by the lake there, wherever, Summit Street, wherever they had a regular range there that you would drive.
Okay.
And I remember one time he gave you some kind of signal to hold back or whatever. He had his arm up and you were supposed to take off at a certain, and I took off way before. I figured he was going to put that arm down, and you never put it down yet. And
You jumped the gun?
I jumped the gun. But I did pass my test, I think only one time.
Very good. Thank you. And who do you have here, please?
I'm Irene Dine. I was taught by my neighbor man, Mr. Pagelo. He took me
Okay.
out a couple times.
Okay.
And then I worked for Thomas Brothers, and they had an old 49 Pontiac, and they let me take that home over weekend, and I drove it around the pasture. And that's where I got my experience. And then when I took my test, Roland Thomas let me use his, I didn't have a car, we didn't have a car at home.
Okay.
So Roland Thomas let me use his car. It was a 51 Chevy.
Okay.
And I took it in Manitowoc, and I made a U-turn backwards. So I slid through too. And after a while, I bought that car.
Oh, you bought the car, yeah? Very good. Thank you. Thank you. And who do you have here, please?
Yeah, Christopher Canal from here in Cleveland, and it definitely brings back a few memories I'd forgotten about. And I grew up in the south side of Milwaukee County, but I spent summers on a farm in Iowa with some relatives there. So I had been driving tractor and a 47 Ford pickup truck for 4 years by the time I went for my driver's license. But I was probably, I guess it'd been about a year I'd been in driver ed in high school. It was one of
Okay.
the first few years they offered driver ed. So between my farm driving and the driver ed, I thought it was just superb. And I'm an eldest son, so of course I was the best driver ever created. And the most embarrassing moment of my life, I think, was failing the test. But we have to throw in that it was Milwaukee, and the only family vehicle was a 12-passenger van. So I was driving a 12-passenger van, and I think the only thing I did right was parallel park. I think everything else was a mess. So, but my brother, a couple of years later, took the cake when he took the same 12-passenger van, and as he was coming around the corner, he had one block to get back to the test station yet.
Yes.
As he was coming around the corner, as he describes it, a really old lady with a cane stepped out off the curb and onto the street. And so he just laid on the horn as loud as he could and kept on going, and the guy just waved his head like this. That was the end for him. So he was probably more embarrassed than me.
Thank you. Very good, Chris. Thank you.
No, he failed on that one.
And who do you hear, please?
John Wiegand.
Hi, John.
I started driving tractor
Okay.
down, up and down the lane and in the field.
Very good.
I guess my father and brother got me started on that, a little Ford 8N. It's easy enough to handle. And
Okay.
after that, I went to a car, and most of the time, my mother went along with me, because my father didn't have enough patience for that. Probably for good reason, too. I didn't take a driver's ed course. I should have. Probably would have been better, but I eventually got my license in Kiel.
All right. Very good. Was Pearl or was he out of it already?
I think it was somebody else.
All right. Okay. Very good. Thank you. And who do you have here, please?
Victor Schill from Glenbula, Wisconsin. I got my driver's license in 1953, 1950 Chevy.
Okay.
And I took my driver's license test in Kiel.
Okay.
And I remember it was very snowy. It was middle of December 22nd or 23rd. It was snowing and icy.
Oh, boy.
And I went around the block, and he said, park, do parallel parking by the fire, and I said, it's against the law. He said, you passed.
Good job. Good job. And who do you have here, please?
Walter, Chris.
Yes, Walter.
I never did take a driving test.
You never did.
I drove in Sheboygan when I was 13.
Okay.
I worked in a garage that time. He says, follow me, and I did. In 1937, I went to the bank and paid my quarter and got my license.
No kidding. Just as slick as that, huh? Holy cow. Thank you.
My dad taught me how to drive.
Your dad did. Okay. Very good. And you, what car was that again, please?
29 Essex.
Oh, my gosh. Very good. And who do you have here, please?
Kathy Wagner from Cleveland here. I didn't get my license until 1953, and my husband was going to teach me how to drive, but after a couple of sessions around town, it was decided that I was going to get my license somewhere else, so I went to LTC in Manitowoc, and I got my license. I mean, I had my classes there, and I got my license the first time around.
Very good.
So I guess I did pretty good. I did so much backing. Bob used to say I could back better than I could drive forward. Because behind some school in Manitowoc, we had to back.
Oh,
you know,
all the way down.
From here all the way down to there.
Very good. Well, that was good training. Good. Thank you. And who do you have here, please?
Well, it's a long story. It'll take me all night to explain it. I really was learning when I was married. And Vernon, he didn't have any patience with it. We had a clutch, you know, or whatever it was. I think we had a shift or something. I don't know what it was. And then he always hollered at me, you're going to burn out that clutch. You're going to burn out that clutch. Wait until we get it automatic, he says. That never happened.
So you really did.
And my two boys learned them all by themselves in our driveway.
Oh, really?
With an old Model A. They went up and down,
up and down.
and when they brought home an old Model A. When he first brought it home, then he said to me, when Butch got into the Model A, he says, well, I'd like to see him start that Model A. And nothing got said. And then all of a sudden, I says, what did you say? He was driving up and down the driveway. I figured it out myself how to start it.
Well, thank you very much. Good job. And who do you have here?
Marie Pippert.
Yes, Marie.
My dad had the Cleveland garage, so I could pick any car.
Oh, boy.
And I was 16, and Harold Wimler, which is now Tavern, he was a salesman there, and he's the one that taught me to drive. And I remember I picked out one with a rumble seat. I wish I had that car today, but I don't remember the year.
Yes.
But one lesson he gave me, that was it. And we drove, and he put his leg out of on the window on the side. Now drive. Go this way, go that way, turn here, turn there. And it's just the one lesson.
That was it.
Yep.
And you
and
made
I
it.
got my license when I was 16, and it was a quarter you send into Madison. 25 cents.
Good enough.
Couldn't get away with it
Thank you
now.
very much. And who do you have here, please?
Dorothy Anderson, and my uncle had a old Chevrolet, and I was about 14, and then he took me out to learn to drive.
Okay.
And I don't ever remember when I got the license.
Yeah.
It just kept on going.
Kept on going. You had a good time all the while, right?
Right.
Thank you. And who do you have here, please?
Charlie Bauer from Highway C, Newton, and we had an international pickup truck, and basically my two older brothers and my dad, if you could pull up to the combine without hitting the spout
Very good.
and back it up to the elevator, you could drive the truck.
Very good. And you said who taught you then?
It was probably my older brothers.
Okay. All right. Very good, Charlie. And who do you have here, please?
Edith Lutsy. I live in Cleveland. I got my driver's license when I was 30, in 1934. And I was 14 years old too. But we didn't have to take a test at that time. We
Really?
just said we had to drive, had been driving like with my brother or my father.
Mhm.
And we maybe like 200 miles, and then we just sent in and we just got it. We didn't have
Really?
to take a test.
Well, look at that. Well,
I never took the test.
Thank you.
It was a Studebaker touring car. You know what
Oh,
a
really?
touring car was?
No.
It didn't have a solid top. It had canvas top.
okay. So you had style while you took your test, huh? Or you took your driving.
We were driving one
yeah.
night, and there was a storm, and it tore off the top of the car. Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
And then we all got soaked.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. Okay, Jerry O'Neill, the videographer. Mine was sort of uneventful compared to everybody here. Again, living on the farm, driving tractors was a big benefit, and I had a 49 Ford, and my dad taught me a little bit how to drive, and around Valders, one route around the block, and I got it, so I was happy too. Okay, I guess we're going on into our business of the evening, and Kathy, I guess you can get us introed into it, and we'll go from there.
Okay, well, we'll let Chris come up here, and he's going to do a power presentation of his travels in Germany.
Okay.
Just to do a comparison of our architects, what Al will be doing a slide presentation on that.
Okay.
And I do want to add that with your driver test years ago, you had a car with a clutch and a brake, and also there was only reverse, and it was first, second, and third.
Mhm.
Right? I mean, it was just different than it is today, right?
Much different.
Much different.
Thank you, very good. And take it away, please.
All right, well, now that we got the lights off, I wanted to kind of ask you a question or two. First off, how many of you have a little bit of German background in you? All right. How many of you came directly from Germany yourself? How many had your parents come from Germany? And grandparents? Okay, okay. So that's kind of what we came up with for the idea tonight, was that we want to talk a little bit about some of the German influence on buildings that were created here. But I want to take you through a little bit of a trip. First, we'll look at some things here, and then go to Germany to see the roots of some of the things which you may have observed here all your life, but perhaps didn't get the connection of how it was indeed a German thing. And Alan is going to talk about some of the specific buildings we have here in town. But related to that, how many of you as second or maybe third generation Germans recognize my hat? Okay. How about Alan? Are you familiar with it?
Yes. It's the apprentice, Zimmerman, young apprentice, part of his garb that he must wear as he travels around the country, going from master builder to master builder, and makes himself available, sort of like an itinerant carpenter traveling around.
Excellent, yes. And we'll talk about it when we get there, but until 2003, these were only worn by German Zimmermen, which would be a kind of a cross between a carpenter and a timber framer. They had both skills. Here in the US, there's never been very tight control over who could do timber building or carpentry. We have a carpenters union, but it's fairly weak compared to what exists still today in Germany. So in Germany there were guilds, and they're still very active today. If you want to be a carpenter, if you want to be a plasterer, if you want to be really any trades person, you need to be licensed, and you need to go through a very specific training. You can't just start your own business. There's a lot of restrictions on it. So we'll look at some of those aspects. But I thought we'd start off with a little background about one of the prizes which is in our midst, and that's the Lutsy house barn. And after having worked on this for a number of years, I slowly started to get an understanding of what German architecture was all about. This was one of the first years when we had started on the building, and we had cut back some of the shrubs and brush that was around it, but it was a number of years after this picture yet before we really even started on it. It got in a lot worse condition before we got going with it. And there's the other end. After we put up on top here, you'll see some chipboard on the inside to keep the moisture out where the siding had fallen off. And so that was kind of our starting point, and an interior shot of the infill. Now you'll see a lot of that today, and this was infill between the timbers. So here are the timbers, which are the structural elements of the walls, both the interior walls and the exterior walls. And then there's this clay and straw mix behind here, which is packed around wooden staves. And over the top of it is a typically whitish lime wash. And that's what we have at the house barn. It's another shot at the end of it. And part of the interior. This portion of it had plaster and lath put into it, but in general that wasn't used in the German building. It shows that it was a little bit later than when the building was first assembled on the corner of it. So a little bit of the timeline. In 1984, we formed Centerville Settlement, and the Lutsy house barn applied for and received the National Register status. So we're already at 22 years ago, if my math is right. We started in 1990 doing cleanup and cataloging there. In 92, we got title to the property, deeded over from the Lutsy family. And in 94, the Wisconsin Trust for Historic Preservation named the Lutsy house barn the most valuable endangered building in Wisconsin. And that year, it placed a notch ahead of the Pabst Mansion in Milwaukee. For those of you that may have been there, they felt that the Lutsy house barn was more valuable as an asset to the state. And then in 95, we started some structural restoration. So what is a timber building, and how is it different from a log or stave building? And here you see some examples of things not timber buildings. This is a log building, which generally, in a log building, they could be round or square, and they would have simple notched joinery in the corners, and usually be stacked one above the other. You can also find them going vertically. So this is also a log building here. And here you see a Norwegian stave building, which is kind of a hybrid between them. But again, it's pretty much solid wood. So here we have the combination you saw up above, and here's this portion all stuck together in one building. Well, because they started to run short of timber in the old country, the various kings in the German states came up with regulations of how the buildings might be built to be strong and yet not use as much material. So they came up with regulations for a half-timbered building. And this is a prime example of what a half-timbered building might look like. And you see the structural elements here. They're exposed so that you can see them from the outside. And they have some kind of infill between them. Now this one is a brick infill with a lot of patterns to it. And this actually was owned by the, if I'm going to remember right, I believe it's the Rockefeller family up at Acadia National Monument. The infill on a German-style building can be brick. It can be this kind of patterned brick. It can be clay. And there's a lot of different ways that the clay and brick can be put together. Usually they were overcoated with that white coating that we saw. But this one was so beautiful, they've elected to leave it fairly exposed. This is another German-style building in Wisconsin. This is down in Germantown. Alan, were you involved with this one at all? Are you familiar
Yeah.
with it? Okay. I mean, I just happened upon it as I was driving, and I thought it was a beautiful example and beautifully executed to be able to show the timber. And it has modern material here in the infill. It's a stretchy type of material so that it's much more weatherproof and lower maintenance, but it still exactly shows what a German-style building might look like. So what is a house barn? Here you see some different examples of them. Only this one up here is in the United States. As far as we've been able to determine recently, in the German house barn, I'm down to 3 examples in the United States. This one is in Manning, Iowa, and it was purchased in Germany by a little group in Manning, Iowa, and they brought the entire building over and assembled it on the spot with German tradespeople, put on this roof on it, and it's a wonderful building, but it's a German building, it's not an American building. These other ones are buildings that you'll see a little closer up as we go. This really doesn't look like a barn, but all of the hamlets in Germany had the very wise urban planning early on that pretty much nobody lived in the countryside because that's where you grew crops and had animals, and people were sociable and needed protection both, so they lived in the cities. And here you see this door, okay, and that's actually a barn door. And when there were times of trouble because of military aggression, or it was the season to bring the cattle in, or just because it was night, whatever the farmer wanted, they would bring their animals in from the countryside, march them down the city street, open these gates, and behind here is the livestock area. Same thing on this building here. You see the large doors underneath here? Same thing right here. So these are all house barns, even though they don't look like barns, they had that function. And so I use it to describe it as a building that houses livestock and people in the same structure.
Now, was that a reed roof on that one building in Iowa?
Yes, yeah. Well, I can't say that it's reed, but it's a thatched roof. Most likely it's straw, but I'm not sure of the source on that.
Seen a lot of them in Holland.
Yeah, and well, in Holland there's a ready supply of reed, but in Germany usually it was straw, rye straw, barley straw, what they had, they worked with as best they could. Now the infill we're talking about is also in English called nogging. And I've always kind of been interested in the idea that over 60% of the world's population lives in clay houses today. 6 out of 10 people live in a clay house. And it's an excellent building material if it's kept dry and if it's reinforced with straw or other long material. In the German buildings, it's used as a wall infill, and it acts as a thermal mass as well as structural strength. It doesn't really insulate in our modern sense of the word of insulation, but it really does help isolate the warmth and the cold because of the mass it has. It just takes a long time to heat up and cool down. It's also a drying agent for the timbers, and that's an important thing, that anytime there's rain or moisture, it gets picked up by the clay and the lime, and that evaporates it, and the drying power of that clay is quite exceptional and keeps the timbers exceedingly dry, much drier than they would be in open air, okay? Because the clay is, it actually whips the moisture away from it. And it's usually covered with a lime wash, and that gives a little more water repellency so that it doesn't just literally wash away in a hard rain. So here you see what clay is all about, and clay nogging. This is a Pomeranian building, and we bring in the clay, and it's all put into little pieces in whatever means is needed in order to sun dry it. And there's what the walls look like as they're being recreated. We have these staves in here which are sandwiched in or pinned in or pegged in depending on the kind of building. And then 2 people come and pack clay from the 2 sides and slowly build it up. And once it's built up and fills the opening, here you see it as it's coming towards the top, and it's typically about 1 inch away from the surface here at that point. And then it gets treated like this. This is a fellow that I trained with from Dusseldorf, Germany, who has been a full-time clay person for, I think, 27 years. He has a clay company in Germany. There are 7 companies in Germany that do this clay infill walls now. They're all booked 6 months to a year out in advance. And the German government licenses them again to do it. It's a trade. And they have to be, in order to do this as a business, they have to guarantee no cracks in this clay for a period of 5 years. And they do that with, first off, just knowing the techniques, but there's a few modern things they've done with it, but in general, it's the same age-old technique they've used all along. And if you owned a building in Germany, you could call somebody like Frank, and they would come and work on your building, and it's just a standard trade, just like getting insulation blown in your attic or whatever would be done here. Here's another way to put in the clay. This is more what we generally call a wattle and dodges. It's kind of woven together like that. And this is in the same Pomeranian background building. It's a different building, but it supposedly came from people building from the same part of Pomerania. It was built on the same farm and moved. And I don't know why one was vertical and one was like this, but both techniques are used there. So we're back to the house barn, again to give you some idea of what the timber framework is all about. And I don't have a very good grip of German, but the term that's used for this is Fachwerk. Okay, and I thought in the beginning that meant the timbers. And then some other people said, no, that's really the infill. That's the Fachwerk on it. And finally, Frank was able to explain to me that the concept is bigger than that, and that the concept really means framework. And what it implies is a combination of all of this, that you have an exposed framework where you see those elements, and you see the infill in between. So the entire wall really is titled Fachwerk. So here you see us putting some new stone under there. Some of you may know Ed Heckman. He's a good guy doing the stone. He still comes and helps us in spite of a lot of health challenges, and he loves doing stone. So here's as we started to make progress with it. It wasn't as white looking as that picture looks. It looks like we really got wild slinging it at the building, but that's mostly, I think, just the exposure of the picture, because it really didn't look like that. A little trouble with the, there we go. That's more what it looked like. I think that was actually the same day that we took that picture. So all the building in this case was lifted up, and we're putting stone underneath it, recreating that foundation again. And there you see an idea of what the German Fachwerk is all about. One of the other projects we do, I just threw this in for fun, is bread baking and bake ovens. And we're very interested in anyone that has knowledge of where there are any German bake ovens yet, any place where we could take pictures or measurements, or in our best dreams, I guess, actually use an oven again. This is one that we use at Ed Klessig's Civil War house farm. And there you see us checking the loaves. And Marie Pfeiffer getting ready to bring a few out. And there's some finished work. We're going to do a summer project this summer where we expect to make 100 2.5-pound loaves like these, and we'll be selling them as a fundraiser. And slowly trying to put together a little recipe book about recipes and techniques for using a brick bake oven. So if you have any ideas about that, I'd sure like to hear about it. Here's a building that I toured in Sheboygan not too long ago. And I wondered maybe if Charlie Bauer could give us some idea of if he's seen a wagon like this before.
Yeah, I think that's a model, isn't it?
Very good, Charlie. And I was hoping you were going to say it wasn't yours, because I don't know whose it is, and I would be surprised if it was yours. But this is actually a model, and I just threw it in here for fun. I know Charlie enjoys the modeling, and this was a project that they had down at the Sheboygan Historical. I just thought up close you can't hardly tell the difference. There's this little steam engine and everything, and this equipment actually ran the equipment that you see in the background of those little belts. Pretty neat. But here's the equipment we use. We try to use all of the vintage tools and equipment, and here you see one timber which is rotted away, and we're replacing it with this new red oak piece here, using the chisels and the mallets and the square and the same technique that they would have used. And there's Edith hard at work. You wondered what she does on weekends and how she stays in such good shape. Now you know. She's actually a hewer, and she's hewing that log with a broadaxe. And all of the pieces that we use the broad axe and hew them by hand. So this is one of her workouts. And using a boring machine for drilling the holes where we make mortises, which are the little pockets where the other pieces of wood fit into, and that's what gives it the structural strength. Color shot of that inside one. And this is upstairs at the house barn, again, just to get an idea of what that kind of construction looks like. There used to be, apparently, a lot of buildings like this around. I don't know specifically about house barns, but a lot more buildings like this than what we ever find now. So if any of you have any memories of what those may have been like, I'd certainly be interested in hearing those or getting it on the tape. Another inside shot. Does anybody recognize that tool?
No.
No?
It's an artist maker's vise.
Yeah, it's a leather vise. These two pieces here are clamps, and they squeeze together and put the leather strapping here at the top. There's a little foot pedal here that brings the vise together. As we started to explore how buildings were built in this area, some of you may recognize this as the former nickel vines, and we were real interested in how they made this basement roof, because the house barn has exactly the same type of brick rounded roof like that, and I think Mr. Pape is going to have some pictures of some basements, I believe, that we can look at. But again, if any of you have any buildings that you're aware of that still have that kind of a ceiling in the basement where we could get some ideas of how it was built, that'd be real helpful. Our basement in the Lutsy house barn is a beautiful arch structure like that, but we are going to have to redo it in the next couple of years, so we're trying to learn more about it. There's some windows that were put into the building, we think probably about 1900, and some of them like this one that are just temporary that we've put in. But all of them probably had a shutter on it like this. We actually found this one up in the attic, and it's the same size as would fit most of the windows. That's the only example we have, but probably they were all shuttered. And when we go to Germany a little bit, you'll see the shuttered windows there. And we're getting ready to do more replacement of the timber. These are really rotted away. It was over 100 years there were vines here on the south side of the building, so we had a lot of decay on the south side, and a lot of pieces needed to be replaced. And there you see what it looked like when we started out, and as we're starting to put it together, and I'll just show you a quick process of what happens with it. We lifted up the entire wall, in this case, with these jacks, decided which pieces had to come out, which could be repaired in part, which had to be replaced. Again, getting ready to lift out this sill. Originally that was 12 inches by 12 inches square and 45 feet long, and probably weighed 3,000 pounds when it was put into the building. In this case, I lifted it out myself, and I don't think it weighed more than 35 pounds. There's really nothing left of it.
You couldn't see what kind of wood it was, though.
All of this base is ash, but we're replacing the base sill with white oak. And I think there wasn't enough white oak available then. They used what was available, and ash at their time was a good strong wood and would have made sense to use. All of the vertical posts in the building and all of the upper pieces are also ash. And you see me lifting it out. It really didn't take any effort other than being a little big and clumsy, and it was like a feather. So there you see the foundation underneath as we're cleaning it up. We have had here a couple of archaeological digs. High schoolers come out from Manitowoc, and it's been one of the few programs in the state of Wisconsin that has a, I guess you'd call it a certified summer training program for high schoolers. We've had that, I think probably 6 out of the last 10 or 12 years they've done digs. So here you see again that evolution of the wall. We're starting to put in a few more pieces here. And there's Charlie hard at work. He puts Edith on the broad axe, and he does the clay. So we've got this clay has been put in here. Actually, most of this got put in by master's students from Sheboygan. We had 22, I think, all women. No, it was one guy that are in a master's education class in Sheboygan. And they came out for 2 days to do clay to find out what it's all about to be teaching using hands-on experiences. So they learned while we were teaching them, and it was a great experience all around. And there you see that first panel, which has gotten a little more of a finish to it now. And there's with the whole section finished, and with the interior. So our goal was to kind of recreate the look that they had then. And I think as you look at some of the German buildings, you'll see that I think we've pretty much accomplished that. This is still going to be done here, and this is a window. So, after having done that, I was challenged by a lot of different parts of the construction of this building and wondering what I might learn by going to Germany. And the same time that I was thinking about it, the Timber Framer Guild of North America put together the first ever training program for guild members to go to Germany. I've been a member of the American Guild for about 10 years and was one of the people on that first roster. So we went over there in January of '03 and we participated in a training class and really got involved in the community for about 10 days. This is a view from the upper part of the city. The upper part is surrounded by this river and an artificial moat. There's probably about 10,000 people live, no, not even 5,000 I think. 5,000 people might live in the old city. It still has the moat on 3 sides and this cliff on the other side. And you'll find cities like this throughout Germany where they weren't bombed. They're still the way they were then, and they take great pride in how long they can make their buildings last and what they do with their buildings. So down here you see a first example of a German timber building. Again, the large door here and the open framework underneath. Then as you come into the city proper, we were completely surprised when on the second day of the class the instructor announced that there was going to be a little party that night in town, and if we wanted to go into it that would be fine. Well, actually the school is right in the middle of town. We have to walk a block. How many people know what foshing is? A couple of foshing? Okay. Well, from what I understand of it, and my experience with foshing started out as only being pretty much a drunken beer fest in Madison. And it was a college thing, and we would talk about how ethnic we were as we drank the beer. But it's a very German event, and it goes back, I guess, long before Christianity, but of course they try to tie in Christianity with it and have it as a Lent thing. It's sort of like our Fat Tuesday. But each community has a group of characters like this. Okay? And these characters have been around for as many as 400 years. And they recreate the same character every year. If you want to be a part of this guild, you have to actually know somebody and you get invited in, and it's fairly secret who's in it. But you always dress exactly the same. These are seashells glued onto here. Okay? I mean, and they're very well described exactly how they must be built. And if you're a new member, you have to take your outfit in for inspection, and they decide whether or not it's appropriate to let you wear it or if you're going out of the standard norms. Well, each of these communities around here will have as many as 4 of these groups. And every year that community celebrates and these 4 groups come out and they kind of party and have a good time. Every 4th year they go to one of the 4 communities. So there's actually 16 guilds in that state. Every 4 years they rotate somewhere. So every 16 years all the groups are in one city. And that was the second day we were there. All 16 groups came to our little town. So we definitely had to learn about the ethnic celebration and come to appreciate it. So this was what was going on 2 of the nights on the weekend. And it was pretty incredible. If ever you get a chance to go to Germany in the winter, schedule it around that. And it's all throughout the Black Forest they're doing that. They bring in thousands of visitors from all across Europe because it's pretty bizarre actually. So I went there with 11 other timber framers in a week-long short course. And it was the first time that schooling was ever made available to any Americans. And that's what's kind of unique about this hat, is that at the end of that week, those of us that graduated, which I'm glad to say was all 12 of us, we were awarded these hats and allowed to bring them back. And that's the first time that they were ever given to non-apprentices for any other purpose. In fact, I was in the airport in Switzerland, and the woman walked up to me and started speaking in German. And I said I didn't speak any German. She said, "What?" And she was just in shock that I would have this hat. How did you get that? And so I kind of told her the story, and she was just amazed by it. So this is what we did in our class. They start out with very basic things. This is their first year project, and we were immersed right into it. This is compound roofs. So I don't know how many of you are carpenters, but what it amounts to is these are all different angles on this roof. And their training program gives you a flat sheet of paper with a picture from the air, like from an airplane looking down, of what the roof pitches would be like. And then you develop all of the angles and cuts on all of these boards and everything, how it fits together without using any mathematics. There's no calculator, there's no trigonometry. It's a fascinating experience of being able to do it on a sheet of paper and extending lines from one place to another place, and it all comes together very magically. And we had 4 engineers in our group. One of them was a PhD from Colorado, and the other guys had all been doing roof work for years and years. I was the least experienced one there, and there wasn't a single one of them that could explain really how it worked, and they were all amazed by how it came together. So it was a really neat thing to learn. And again, it was the first time that they had ever been willing to teach how Germans do that kind of layout. Here you see a bigger model of the same kind of things. When they are ready for their tests, they are given one of these drawings, and pretty much just like our driving test, whether or not they get licensed depends on how they do their drawings and then how they execute them to put together something. This is a half-size model of what a dormer, a window dormer would look like when attached to an older timber building. And that's why you see all these older buildings, 300, 400, 500 years old, that have been modified through the years because the timber framers know exactly how to do it. So here are some of those buildings. This one is about 325 years old, and these are scattered throughout the city. And the patterns and how they pull together is a real source of pride for the family. And most of these places do stay in the family for generation after generation. You see that one we saw earlier? This is a timber frame building, but in some parts of the city they don't elect to show the framework the way we had on those other pictures. So there's the street scene. You see things like this on here. Those are left over from 250 years ago when they would be lifting things up into that level from here on the street. And here you see part of the big wall. And there's one little entrance under here, and then all the way around the rest of the perimeter is a walled city. So there you see some of the shutters that we were talking about. Sometimes pretty extreme colors, and sometimes real mild colors, whatever the owner wants. But all of these panels are lime wash over the top, and part of their tradition is that every spring you trim your trees and you fix your lime. That's just what they do. And anybody that doesn't do that is considered kind of inappropriate or is looked down on in the community as not taking care of your house. Again, you look at the detail work that gets put in here, and those are all 8-inch thick timbers that are cut that way. They're not just little surface pieces. That's how the framework is done. That building, they told me, was made in 1480. And it's kind of tipsy and fallen down, but they love it, and it's really the character of that whole city is expressed there. Very few other buildings that I see the vines on. I was kind of surprised at that, because typically a good German wouldn't let the vines grow on there, but they must have decided it was pretty, or maybe they were lazy, I don't know. Now here you see 3 stories that are newer, and the original building, I think, got lifted and put up on top of this at some point. So you see the old style framework on top and a newer style down below. And again, you see different colors of paints. Some communities all tend to paint theirs the same way. Here in Rottweil, which is a city we're seeing, they have a lot of different colors and patterns. So we did have to celebrate a little bit. After looking at all those buildings, we were quite tired. So this is something, though, that I had never had here, and I didn't know if any of you had, and it's a meat salad is what it translates to. And there's 3 or 4 different kinds of meat in it, along with a couple different kinds of vegetables. I forget what they were, but it was just excellent. Salami and summer sausage, along with some really salty ham, and I think cucumbers. Quite good. Has anybody ever had that here?
Apples? Were apples in this one?
There may have been apples in there. I don't recall. I did end up actually writing down the recipe. I went and I found the chef and I wrote it down, but it was complex enough, and I'm not a good enough cook that I haven't tried to recreate it. But it kind of surprised me that food like that, I haven't seen it here, at least in this community, so I don't know why. They did have some good beer. Now this one here was now when we're out in quest of being able to explore some house barns. The other one was the other pictures that were really just walking through town and getting a feel for it. Now I took a day off of the class, and I had a local host who was my translator who drove me out, and we looked at a number of different house barns. So this one was built in 1680, and it's getting ready to be redone by the same family that had it. It's been empty for almost 50 years. And the family sort of moved away, but they kept ownership of it, and it's kind of in a small little hamlet. I mean, there's houses this far away from it, all around. And it's just kind of stood there, and there's sheep that graze up around it. And you can see it's getting a little bit dilapidated, but for them it's a perfect project for a little fix-up and remodel. So they're going to be able to go back into their, 420-year-old house. And there's the end of it. Again, you see the infill, okay? It has the brick underneath and the lime over the top. But in general, when we got up close and looked at it, the timbers were in very nice condition. So we went over to see the fellow now that was going to take us around. This is my guide and translator. So we went to see him, and of course, this guy lives in a house barn. And this one was built in 1880. And you see the big opening here. And indeed, right inside of here, there's rope and pulleys, and he can lift the hay up here into his third floor attic. And on the back side of this first floor living quarters, there's room for his cattle and his chickens. And this is, I think he said this is the 5th generation living in it since his family built it. So we'll go inside of this building, and here you see the fella. Alan, you can perhaps help me with my German. It was pronounced something like Kalkohofen.
Yeah.
But am I close at all, or?
Yeah. Kachelofen.
Okay.
A clay oven.
Yeah, and it's a high temp fired ceramic oven, and it has an air chamber behind here. In other words, these don't get so hot. He could lean up against this under full fire, really, because there's an air space behind, and the hot air moves through there. Not the exhaust of the fire, but the heated air moves around it. So you can see these kind of glazed tiles in 3 rooms, and it's fueled by wood in the kitchen. So you don't have to bring any dirty wood into your living room. You just bring it in the kitchen and fill it from the back side. And it was just very comfortable and warm the day I was there, and we were there in February. It was maybe 20 degrees outdoors. And so every home there has this kind of a heating unit in it. And we think there was something like this in the house barn. There are other people around Wisconsin that have found pieces of this kind of ceramic, and there's a couple actually down at Kohler at the along the river there where they recreated the big Austrian barn. There's 2 heating units similar to this. And this is the inside of his house, just beautiful, very nice. And those are the timbers which are structural for his building. And they just look like they're a polished piece of furniture to me. So then we went off to see an older one. And this lady's lived in this place since she got married. She's 80 years old. Her husband passed away about 10 years ago. She got married when she was 16. Her husband told her that if they'd move here, that pretty soon he would remodel it for her. And they remodeled it 52 years after she got married. So we get to see the remodeling on the inside. Now we got to get out our extension cords because there's no light on the 3rd floor. We want to go up in the attic and look at some timber. So we brought along our extensions cords, and we're going to wheel it out. This is on the 2nd floor now. And that's still up there in the 3rd level. And we see this chamber goes down to the 2nd floor. Even though they haven't had anything in here for years, the rope was still there. And then we're looking at a couple different things. This is exactly the same kind of stairs, how they're built going into the Lutsy house barn on the 2nd floor. Some real nice joinery here, which we don't see this particular type around here, but it was used heavily in that part of the country. And my guide is just awed by this joint, I think. Timber people get into how the joinery is done. And here we're going into what was the granary on the 3rd floor, which is really kind of a, think of it like as their jewel box. They put their most valuable things up there because grain was one of them. And there's just a fabulous door latch on here, and we have the similar kind of latches at the Lutsy house barn. The floor is insulated with sawdust, just like we have here. And here now we go into this is the widow that was there, and we're looking at her kitchen on the second floor. When she moved here, and for her first 18 years of married life, right up here, there was a 4-foot hole in the ceiling, okay? And an open hearth fire here, and a similar 4-foot square opening on the 3rd level and up out to the top. So it was an open hearth fire, and all the smoke just went up through the hole. And that's how she cooked there until she finally was able to get a remodel from her husband, and they put in a chimney and some stacks, and she was real proud of how that had gone. But I think she was also rightfully proud of having survived with the open hearth stove all those years. As she said, many of her neighbors had it during the same time frame. Now this was one of the more peculiar ones, and I didn't realize what I was really seeing. Well, obviously it's her toilet, but I didn't understand the challenge of it until afterwards my translator kind of expounded on it a little bit. This is the door here back into the main building, and this is kind of like a deck, okay? And when they put in the city sewer, which I think he said was about 1950, they put in the city sewer, they decided to keep the toilet and the bathroom in exactly the same place where it had been. So what amounted to is there was this little wall over here, and as he then explained it to me, you would walk out from the bedroom and the living room on the 2nd floor, you walk down to the end of the building, open your door, and there would be what would be the equivalent of our outhouse. And until 1950, this would just drop down into the cow yard, because they were right over the livestock area. And so all they did was attach water in a sewer pipe, but everything else stayed exactly the same, and I was pretty surprised by that. I never thought about it before. But it was pretty sophisticated for them, because they could use the restroom on the 2nd floor and not to go outside, so I guess they were right up there. And this was her husband's little shop area, and this looks again exactly like what we have in the house barn, in the interior. We have the lime wash over the timbers, and we saw a lot of this that on the interior in the area where there's livestock, they just lime wash over everything, and you don't see the timbers directly. So he had a lot of his tools in there yet, and we got to look through those. So just for a little contrast, I wanted to tell you about the state-of-the-art side of things in German timber framing. Nowadays, you can find all sorts of people to do the original style work. They know all of the trades, they know all of the techniques. A lot of the things that were forgotten here until the 1970s, late 1970s, timber framing was almost a lost art in the United States. There was only a couple people that knew anything about it, and most of them had read it in a book and thought it'd be interesting to try it, but really didn't know. There's been a big revival with it. In Germany, it's stayed current all along. But what they use now is a computer-controlled machine. They call them beam processors. That's how it translates best. They're fully automatic machines. They'll cut a semi-load of timber per day with one operator, and that operator pretty much has to take these timbers off of the truck, get into the machine, and put them back on the truck. But it takes one guy all day just to do that. So you can imagine about 40,000 pounds of timber one of these processors will run through. Now, just like here, we're running out of big timber. So the beams themselves are what we call here glue lamp. And the German engineers say that that doesn't speak to it properly, but that's what we call it, I guess. German engineers have a real hard time with using timber in a public building because you never know where there might be a knot or a weak spot. And it's pretty hard to predict where knots are and how weak something is if you don't have the piece in front of you, and by the time you test it, you broke it. So what they've come up with is they want everything to be able to be fully engineered. And what that means is they build each piece of timber, like a 12 by 12 inch timber is built by gluing together perfect other pieces of wood so that they can engineer exactly how strong it is. And the whole thing becomes much more affordable that way. But when you go to order pieces, you just call a guy up and say, I want you to make me 15 12 by 12s 30 feet long. He says, okay, he puts them on the truck the next day. He builds them for you to spec. So here you see one of these machines. This is a smaller, older one already. It has a brand name of Hundegger. But the timber comes in here on the end. These pieces here all come up and operated at the same time. They cut all the joinery in it, whatever it might be. They slide it on, they cut the next one, and it's I mean, it's just an incredibly fast robot to watch. Boom, 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 boom. Now, if you go to order a new house, the new owners can see their designs on a computer as if they had a 3D walkthrough. So you can walk into your living room on the computer, you can walk into your bedroom, you can walk down the hallway, you can say, oh boy, I don't like how low the ceiling is here, I want that door bigger, I want this, whatever. They modify it on the computer. When they finally have it all set, you sign the contract. Now at that point, they order the materials, and they order 0% extra because the machine doesn't make a mistake. So they order exactly what you need for your house. Then the timbers are built with whatever species you want. So if you want some white pine, you get white pine. If you want fir, if you want oak, you want whatever, they build it for you just like this. Okay, you see these individual boards are all glued together. And so somebody ordered what maybe, this is maybe like 8 by 10 inches, I would guess. They ordered that. They told them how long they wanted it. They make joints of individual pieces in the middle. So you can get these up to 80 feet long. And they wrap them in plastic so they don't get a scratch. When they're delivered, they're like living room furniture. Here's the joinery cut by that machine. It takes that machine approximately 3 minutes to do each of these ends, and about 4 minutes to cut this chamfer down the length. This is about 1 inch by 2 inches here, and the machine has cut that all out. So the guy has to label it. That's about all he has to do. Get it on the machine and label it. And so they'll cut this little pallet load here. That's about 20 minutes worth of work for the machine.
What kind of glue do they use that they get figure that that's going to last a long time?
I don't know, but again, they've engineered it all, and the designs on these things all, Edith, all of the buildings that they're building now are designed for a 300-year life.
Oh, yeah?
And that's the difference between American thinking and German thinking. So here you see one of the buildings that they've built. Okay? This one here was indeed about 3 weeks, because it was extra complicated. 3 weeks from the time the guy signed the contract until they delivered all the wood at the site, all cut and sized, ready for assembly. Yeah. And as little as 2 weeks. In a typical 1 or 2 family house, you get 2 weeks delivery time. So here you see some close-ups of it. It's slate roofed. This one is going to be used as an apartment. Part of it is a sales area, and part of it is offices. Design life 300 years. Approximate cost $750,000. But when you divide that out over 300 years, you've got a pretty affordable building, and that's what they look at. So there you see the interior. This is going to be a show space. I don't know exactly what they're showing there, but they're going to have large objects of some kind on exhibit that they're selling. So that's their show space. And that's the 3rd floor, an idea of what it looks like. And just stunning, yeah. They also have robotic machines for curved surfaces. Everything that we looked at pretty much was straight, but here you'll see staircases made to order. So this guy runs this machine about 7 hours a day, and all of the computer program goes into it. You can walk in for a new house, tell them what kind of spiral staircase you want, anything that you can conceptualize. They'll design it on a machine, and then they'll cut it. They glue it up themselves on these hydraulic clamps, whatever size is needed, and they run it through the machine. It takes the machine about 12 minutes to cut and drill that entire piece. It's about 18 feet long. And a matched set of these with these little pins, that's where the steps are going to go for the staircase. And another shot of a different one coming out. So they've done a great job of being able to marry the old technology with the new. You might see this kind of curved spiral staircase going into a 400-year-old building. We'll pick up the speed just a little bit. I wanted you to see it because I had fun looking at it. Here's how they do this same kind of stuff in Japan, building a temple door. Okay, this is going to be an octagonal timber, 8 sides cut on it. That's a razor sharp broadaxe, and guess what this guy's wearing?
Socks.
They're little soft Japanese slippers. And he says he likes those because they give him a good grip and he doesn't slip. You cut your foot off in a quarter of a second. And I didn't see a single injury, and all these guys had their full limbs, so I was amazed by it. But there would be 4 of these set up side by side, and each one might have two or three fellows working on it at the same time. They're used to working in some very tight quarters. So here you see another tool that's called a adze. It's kind of a Japanese style, and he's planing off this surface flat. You see his little, I don't know, we always call them go-heads, these little thong things. And he kind of lifts up his toe, and he makes that razor sharp edge come underneath his toe. That's the stop for it. So there you see their tool assortment. And here you see some joinery. And they built this entire frame door. There is no joints that you can see at all. Everything is completely hidden, and it's more or less like trick joinery. It's all cut by hand and with hand tools. There isn't a machine used anywhere on it. All hand saws, everything. And there you see them assembling the frame. That's one piece there, and how that's going to fit in the other one, I don't have any idea. And these guys, I think 8 of them, built this entire thing from memory, hardly talking to each other. They know how to do them. And here you see the door panel here, as it's going to be put together. You can see here these joints. This piece slides over the end, and so you don't see any joint at all, but it locks the whole thing together. Everything's floating. There's actually it's a round wooden hinge right there, okay? And that's going to engage on one end. And that's the finished door right there. They sold that here in the States for $12,000. And they demonstrated it for us in a quiet room of about 500 people after a banquet. And the fellow got up, and in Japanese, he said that if people could really be quiet, they could hear the magic sound of the spirituality, really, of this door. And they tune the door to have the right sound. And as he explains it, when you open the door, you're going into another world. So you want to have a sound that properly portrays that. So the room was completely quiet, and he stepped up to it, the master, and he opened the door, and you heard this, and just this incredible sound. And that's why the door is built the way it is, so that it'll resonate and make that sound. So now you've seen the Japanese temple door. And a little bit of a Cleveland project. This is something I worked on a couple of years ago. This is what I call a frontier German barn. It's all hand hewn, and here you see the brick infill on the end again. We're palletizing those bricks and put them back in when it's reassembled. And here I'm pretty perplexed by what we're going to do next, but we took that whole thing down. And here you see a more modern project I worked on 2 weeks ago. This is outside of Madison in Wanakee, and it's actually county property, but it's a private fundraising group that raised the money. The county said they wouldn't put any money in it. And so we built the timber frame, and it's going to be offices on the first floor. The second floor is going to be open to the public and have barn dances, and there'll be a multimedia center in there. And this third floor is going to be a museum and artifacts, and it's all going to be heated and air conditioned, and there's going to be an elevator that goes up to the third floor, taking handicap to all levels. It's a pretty fancy setup, but we were glad to build the frame and to be able to move on from there. Other people are going to do the rest of the work. I thought it was kind of fun. You see this upper part here? That's the same thing right here. We built 2 of those on the ground, and we built this frame here, and then with this 100-ton crane, we picked up that entire piece and put it on the building all at once. So when you see it like this to this, actually only took the crane about 15 minutes until we had it locked down on the top and all done. And there you see me a little bit at work, and here's as we dropped in the last piece in the main frame and the finished building. Always got to put a pine tree on the end. That's part of the timber framer's celebration of getting a frame up. So that's what a timber building would look like today. And this is a Cleveland project. I doubt that anyone recognizes it. This is a fellow down on the lake shore who thought when he bought the property 15 years ago that he should probably demolish all of it because it was in such bad shape. But instead he's elected to go to it, fixing it room at a time. And this is his last room, his most vintage room. He really didn't know what was under the walls, and they took it all off. That's what's exposed, and he's getting ready to fix it up with the original style. We have a plasterer coming in who's going to do the old lime wash over the brick to take care of it all. So it's going to be a beautiful facility. So that's all I have for today, and I don't know, I think I probably talked a little longer than anybody had in mind, but is there still time for 5 minutes of questions, Kathy?
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
Okay, could
You
we
were
get,
looking for a,
could we turn on the lights, please? I'm gonna make a cut here. Okay, we have a lady with a question in regard to what the presentation this evening. Go right ahead, please.
I'm Dorothy Anderson, and I was wondering, you said at that very end there was something about down in Centerville, a building, and where is that?
Just one moment. Okay, we have a question on the floor, and this gentleman will identify himself and indicate the answers.
Sure, Chris Canal, and that's Jim Van Kooteren's place, which is, if you go on the actual Lakeshore Road, and it's south, you know where there's, I've heard anywhere, there's a priest that lives on the, he doesn't live there, but I mean, the priest that comes from Green Bay, where Baylitz used to be, it's the next place south. Does somebody know the name of who used?
Okay, we have a lady who will identify herself, and she'll give us an answer, please. Go right ahead.
I'm Irene Dine, and we were talking about this building in Hika, and it's was the John Herzog house years ago.
Okay.
In the 1930s when I went to school.
All right, very good, thank you. Okay, we got a gentleman who raised his hand. He wants to identify himself. Go right ahead.
Victor Schill. How many cattle do they have in a hold in that house barn? How many?
Okay.
I want to know how many cattle they do. Cows or horses.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have a question on the floor, and this gentleman will identify himself, please.
Yeah, Chris Canal, and I think the question was about how many cattle might fit in those buildings that we looked at in Germany, and they're not heavy. It's not a heavy cattle area. If you wanted to fill it with cattle, they're big enough space that you could maybe put in 15 cows, something like that. But in those days, and just the same as when they built the Lutsy house barn, it was as much for horses and oxen, poultry. I mean, on the second floor of the house barn, we had sheep and goats and calves and chickens. So they'd herd them up the stairway, and it's kind of done the same way in Germany. So they're not large or extensive at all. And there certainly are modern farms that have, large groups of cattle. You see those occasionally, but the original heritage type buildings were much smaller. At the Lutsy house barn, the first year there was a census, I believe there was 2 horses, 3 oxen, 1 milk cow, and like 17 chickens. So I mean, they were not livestock intensive because they first had to clear the land, and they had to have a lot of feed for livestock. So also a lot of livestock was just held over the summer. They keep as few as they could over the winter.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we got a gentleman that raised his hand. He'll identify himself, please.
I'm Fred Jacoby. About 20 years ago, when we were over in Germany, then one of the families that we visited with and stayed over talked about, he happened to be a businessman, farm equipment business, but he talked about Americans complaining about regulations because they didn't have the first idea what it was compared to what they put up with. But there also are incentives in the building, and building houses or rebuilding buildings the way they used to be, and regulations on the kind of roof. I was wondering if Chris or perhaps Alan or anyone else could comment further on that.
Okay, just one more. Okay, I got a gentleman here who would like to identify himself and perhaps answer a question that was on the floor.
Okay. I'm Al Pape. I've been to Germany, I don't know, half a dozen times. And I've been always impressed with the way the government over there is giving incentive grants to private individuals for restoring their buildings. And they have a kind of a blanket rule that you do not tear down at least the facade of a building. The inside you can modify, but the outside they want to keep it fairly original, and they'll give you like 25% of the restoration costs.
Okay.
But a lot of the buildings that Chris was showing had recently been restored back to their original, back in the 1960s and 70s. Those buildings were covered with stucco, and villages are taking that stucco off and exposing the timber frame. And I noticed on some of his slides, the surface of the timbers had little divot marks. that were chiseled into the timber when the mortar was applied to cover the whole wall. And it sort of defaces the original look of the place, but they stain the timbers and it sort of brightens it up. But where they're located real close together, where they weren't able to get in there and cover the walls with mortar, you can still see the original knocking and timbers without any divots put into them, because it was impossible for workmen to go in there. And that's the way a lot of those are so close in those little villages.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, we got a young lady who'd like to identify herself.
I'm Alice Mathias. I was just wondering, in those house barns, could they raise big families? I mean, they didn't have much room for the cattle, or like you said, they only had one cow and a couple oxen. Did they have large families in those days? Was there room for them?
Okay.
Chris Canal, probably Alan can expound on it a little, but they're actually quite large. The living quarters, there's a lot of space there. At the Lutsy house barn, there is a huge downstairs living room, what they would consider the parlor. A kitchen would be like the entry room or the mud room. That floor alone is as big as a small home would be now. And then they've got the second floor, which is bigger yet because it overlaps another area. So there's 4 bedrooms on the second floor, plus what anybody else might call a giant master bedroom, but the one room is off of it, so it's kind of a walk-through. So, you know, today we wouldn't consider it 2 rooms, but I imagine they did then, or that one was the kids' or the baby's room. But remember, in those days, most everything was 2 or 3 generations. So there was the parents and the grandparents, as well as the children. But at the Lutsy barn, we think that on the 3rd floor, that was the summer quarters for their visiting help. There was itinerant help, and a farm like that needed a lot of people. So we suspect that probably during the summer there was 5 people that lived up in what would be the attic. So I think Alan maybe can tell you a little more about the social life, but that's my understanding of it.
Because they look big, but I just wondered, really, was there that much living space?
Yeah, there's a lot of space. There's nothing in them that feels cramped. The rooms are all quite large, larger than we would have now usually.
Okay, very good, thank you. Okay, I'm quite a distance from Kathy.
Yeah, well, I thought.
Kathy had something she presented here, and she's got some information, really. Go right ahead.
I'm Kathy Sixel, and in regard to Chris looking for a round basement, there is one located in the Fieldstone house that we used to own. Now it is owned by David Halsbach, and it's in the town of Mimi. It'll be the first house on County Trail X as you come into the town of Mimi. And that has the round basement yet, and having the Fieldstone, it's got real thick walls.
Okay, very good.
It would be nice if you go look at it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we got a gentleman who has a question apparently he'd like to ask. Go right ahead, please.
Melvin Eady, and my nephew has, in the old house that isn't quite completely turned down yet, he has a basement in there with 2 pillars in the middle, about 30 inches square, and they hold the walls up.
Okay.
I've got slides of that place.
Okay, great.
Have
Super.
you seen it?
Oh yeah, I've been in there.
Wonderful.
I don't know if you can go in now. He's more than neglected it, and there's no the steps there for. But if you got good insurance, he might let you in. But we drilled when they built the new house there. I drilled the hole through the wall, 62 inches.
Oh my goodness.
A little bit over 5 feet. To get the water over into the new house.
You almost thought you were heading for heaven, huh? Thank you. Okay, we have a gentleman here who would like to identify himself. Go right ahead, please.
I'm Walter Kress, and the barn that you showed the last one there, that Cohn, it was Edward Cohn, and he had the brickyard there
Oh, really?
way years ago. That was part of
Okay.
the one.
But the brickyard was located in Hika?
Yes. Where
Okay.
the barn was.
Oh, really?
Witt had one in front of it, which is now the junkyard, and Cohn had the one in back of it, where the barn is.
Was there 2 brickyards?
Yes. There were
Okay.
2 brickyards years ago.
Very good, very good. Thank you,
I
Wally.
should know, my dad worked in one of them.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Wally.
Sure.